Welcome to this demonstration of version 4.0 of runZero. In this video, you'll be seeing in action our new passive discovery capability, which we call passive traffic sampling, which users in OT environments may find very interesting. This new discovery approach makes runZero the only CAASM solution that combines active scanning, API integrations, and passive discovery. You'll also be seeing our new integration with Tenable Security Center, which helps users improve their overall vulnerability management program. There's also our new first-time user experience workflow for users that are just onboarding to runZero. And finally, there's a new quality of life improvement to help users quickly understand how the runZero correlation engine merged in new data into an existing asset record. If you have any questions or comments or feedback for this release, please contact your runZero account rep, or, as always, you can contact me directly by emailing huxley@runzero.com. Welcome, everybody, to release 4.0 of runZero, the runZero platform. Today, we'll be talking about all the different discovery approaches that we have and how we have updated the UI UX to really reflect that, how customers can build their asset inventory through passive discovery, our new integration with Tenable Security Center, our new first-time user experience, and finally, a quality of life improvement so that our users can understand quickly how runZero correlated disparate data into single asset records. runZero is the first step in security risk management and the best way for organizations to understand their exposure through comprehensive security visibility. And how do we get that comprehensive visibility? It's by being the best-in-class CAASM solution. And to do that, you have to combine active scanning, passive discovery, and API integrations for that comprehensive asset inventory coverage across all of your managed and unmanaged devices, including all types of devices, IT, IoT, OT, no matter where they are, on-premise, in the cloud, or remote. And you need these approaches because there's no single discovery method that gets you both breadth and depth. You can't find unmanaged devices without active scanning. You can't inventory cloud or disconnected devices without integrations. And for some OT environments, passive discovery is a requirement. And I'm happy to report that our UI UX has gotten an update in 4.0 that reinforces everything that I've just said and helps our users unlock that comprehensive visibility. So let's take a look. So you see over here on the upper left, we have reorganized the three different discovery approaches such that they're more obvious and more consistent with easier workflows. In the past, if you wanted to see which integrations were active, you had to go to the tasks section. And if you wanted to set one up, you would click on the inventory, and then you would look for the connect dropdown. And if you wanted to know what the integrations did, you had to jump over to our website to learn more about it. With runZero 4.0, integrations are much more obvious, as you would expect from a leading CAASM solution. And the workflow for managing integrations is much easier and far more streamlined. All the integrations are prominently displayed here to the user with some short blurbs to help them understand what that particular integration does. And it is immediately apparent if a particular integration is active. And to get started, you don't need to go anywhere else because this is your single starting point for all things integration. And if you want to learn more about a particular integration, you're just one click away as well. All in all, this serves to communicate to users that we're a CAASM solution where integrations are front and center, and also encourages the adoption of these features. The one above here is monitor. I'm going to skip over this for now because I'm going to talk about monitor in the next section. But let's take a look at the new scan page. In the past, if you wanted to see your past scans, you had to go over to the tasks section. And if you wanted to run a scan for the first time, you had to know that you wanted to go to deploy first to deploy an Explorer. And if you wanted to configure a scan, then you would go to the inventory, and then you would look for the scan dropdown and select standard scan or RFC 1918 scan. With runZero 4.0, the workflow for managing scans and Explorers is much easier and far more streamlined. All of your past scan tasks are over here. And if you want to get started, need an Explorer, come right here. And then if you want to go and configure a scan, that is also one click away right over here. So to recap, to be a best-in-class CAASM solution, you need a combination of discovery approaches. And with runZero 4, we've made all of them much easier to use. Okay, so moving on to the next section over here. In the beginning, we were just a scanner. And over the last 2 years, we've been adding more and more integrations and so on and so forth. And with runZero 4, we are announcing the general availability of our passive discovery capability, which we call passive traffic sampling. Here is the setup of my demo as a diagram. The server there on the right is one of my other Macs. Over here in this box on the lower left, you can see the configuration that I added to my Cisco Catalyst 3750 switch over there. So it's just 2 commands in my setup to get this all going. This other laptop over here on the left is a Chromebook, and it's a completely different part of my network. It's actually going through the wireless, then going to the switch. And the Explorer over here, that's ingesting this data, that is running on my laptop over here. Okay, and it is directly connected to the switch by Ethernet. So when I generate traffic from this particular Chromebook on the left, going through the wireless, going through the switch, out to this web server over here, that traffic is going to be visible to my Explorer over here, and that'll get picked up for asset discovery. Let's jump into the product so I can actually show you what is happening. All right, just a quick check. There are no assets in this organization. Okay, let's head over to the monitor start page. This is the data source page that I skipped over earlier, but we're having to take a look at it now. And you'll see here, I have an Explorer, but it's not sampling right now, right? It's in yellow, so it's not sampling right now. It's not green. Here you see the sampling configuration for the Explorer, and my Ethernet cable is currently connected to this EN0 interface on my Mac. Everything else here I took as defaults. All right, go ahead and start that. And as you can see, that one Explorer went from yellow to green. It is online now. It is sampling traffic as it's being spanned over from that switch over there. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I remember to make some HTTP requests from my Chromebook over there out to my Mac. Just make a few more requests here so it has something to work with. Now let's go back to the slides so that the Explorer can process that traffic. So there are 2 different types of passive discovery that we want to consider today. All the major players in the OT space use the traditional methodology where they collect all the traffic, right? All of it. runZero has a unique solution, which we call traffic sampling. The traditional solutions save and analyze everything, whereas we don't. We are different. We sample the traffic instead. Full traffic capture requires a lot of storage and a lot of compute power, and is really slow to produce inventory data, but we are different. Full traffic capture solutions, they're expensive to deploy and they're expensive to operate because they typically need hardware appliances or powerful virtual machines, and we are different. Traditional passive discovery solutions are notorious for their long time to value. There's a car manufacturer that told us that they bought more than 2 years ago, and they still have not completed the deployment of it. We are different. This row speaks for itself. We are different. Now, one of the reasons why we're able to differentiate so well is because we are focused on doing asset inventory, just asset inventory, very, very well. This allows us to simply sample the traffic rather than saving every single bit and byte that crosses the network. I want to drive home this idea of why traditional passive discovery capabilities need to be supported by massive hardware. So let's suppose I were to do a download or stream the entire 345 hours of Law and Order, which comes out to about 690 gigabytes by my estimation. A traditional passive discovery capability would need to analyze all 690 gigabytes of it to do its job. With traffic sampling, on the other hand, we are only interested in just enough information to identify an asset or to improve our fingerprint of that asset. Once we have the information that we need, we can safely ignore the rest of the data. We don't need it anymore. Now, suppose that we can fingerprint an asset with just like 1K of data. And I don't know if this is true. I'm making it up. But that would mean that we could ignore 99.999999% of this 690 gigabytes of data that went over the wire. So it actually makes a whole lot of sense that we need a lot less processing power and storage if our focus is asset inventory. I'm going to pop back to the product for a moment and see where we are. All right, let's head over to the inventory and see where we are. Go. All right, and over here, you can see a whole bunch of assets that were discovered through the passive traffic sampling process over here. Right, all done with sampling. And just like an asset that we might have discovered through active scanning, there's a whole bunch of detail in here. As I mentioned before, my Mac had 2 web servers running on it. And through passive discovery, we were able to identify not only that there was this particular asset at this particular IP, but also that it has these 2 pieces of software running on it, these 2 services running on it. You can get more details here, of course. Right. Plenty of detail here. Very similar to what we get with active scanning. So a question that's going to come up for a lot of folks is, is traffic sampling preferred over active scanning? Like, we just released this new passive discovery capability. Is this like the preferred way of doing it? Well, actually, no. Active scanning works very well for both IT and OT networks. And in fact, we continue to believe that active scanning works really, really well in OT environments. You'll notice earlier that after I kicked off the traffic sampling task, I jumped over to some slides, did some slides, and then came back. I had to wait a little bit for the asset inventory to show up. So with active scanning, you can fully fingerprint a device shortly after the Explorer interacts with that device, right? It makes a request out to that device, gets some information, and boom, it has information for the inventory. But with sampling, on the other hand, you need to wait for the devices to talk on the network. The more they talk, the more information you're going to have, the more information you're going to you have at your disposal for fingerprinting. It's a little bit like fine wine. Fingerprinting with sample data gets better the longer you run the sampling. And what I was able to show you over here was the sampling that we did in like 5 or so minutes, something like that. If I were to run the sampling for longer, there would be even more detail and even more assets in this particular view. But I only did 5 minutes, and so this is what we got. But if I did this over time, 20 minutes, an hour, a week, you're going to see lots and lots more detail and information in this inventory. And that is just a limitation of any sort of passive discovery solution. We, of course, are able to start producing inventory data within minutes, but no passive discovery solution is going to be able to start giving you inventory data immediately. Again, with OT environments, what you're looking at are factories, oil and gas pipelines, medical devices, traffic signs on the freeways, and so on and so forth. These are the environments that absolutely cannot have any downtime whatsoever. And so those organizations very much want to avoid anything that might cause an outage. And for this reason, these organizations believe that this last bullet here is more important than the first three. If they're okay with active scanning will give them better results. But if the organization absolutely will not do active scanning, if passive discovery is 100% requirement because of this last bullet point down at the bottom, then they are the perfect candidate for our passive traffic sampling capability. And because passive discovery is more difficult to deploy compared to active scanning, we recommend sticking with active scanning. But if you absolutely must do passive discovery, well then, you're still better off by using our traffic sampling capability because it is still quicker time to value and a lower total cost of ownership. All right, does anybody have any questions they want to ask verbally while I look through the Zoom chat for questions?
I will. If you actively scan asset A and passively discover asset A, I assume it comes together as a single asset record. Is that a true statement?
That is a true statement.
Can you differentiate between the data of the active scan and the data from the passive discovery in the console?
Yes, they have different sources. So if it was found by passive traffic sampling, source sample. If it's through the active scanner, it's source runZero.
We'll look at the asset details and the service details. It doesn't indicate where it came from. So it'll look identical whether it came from active or passive in asset details, but at the asset level, we'll tell you what different data sources contributed to that view.
All right. Other questions before I move on? So Tenable Security Center is just the latest vulnerability integration in runZero's toolkit. Most of the rest were added over a year ago. So why use Tenable Security Center or any of these other integrations with runZero? Let's run through that. There are three ways that runZero can improve your vulnerability management program, right? The first is to ensure proper vuln scanning coverage, right? Attackers can exploit vulnerabilities as part of an attack chain. If your vuln scanner is missing one or more devices, there's potential that an endpoint will remain exploitable by an attacker. So to optimize your investment, you want to make sure that you vuln scan as much as possible, or at least what is important. If you can't afford to scan all of your devices, then you want to make sure that you're at least scanning the crown jewels for your organization. So to that end, it's really important to compare what you're scanning versus a full asset inventory. So you would say, hey, Tenable, Rapid7, Qualys, what are you scanning? And they look at runZero and say, oh, this is everything I have. You make the comparison and you can know, are there any gaps in my vuln scanning coverage? All right, moving on to the second way runZero can improve your vulnerability management program. runZero can help prioritize vulnerabilities based on asset details and network context. All of this comes back to the fact that only 5% of vulnerabilities are ever exploited by the adversary. Take a look at this structure over here. It's a house, but take a look at this structure, for example. This open door is a vulnerability. Obviously, you want to shut that door to secure what's inside. But what happens when you have tens of thousands of structures, all with open doors, and maybe open windows too, and your security team isn't big enough to go shut all of them? Given that only 5% of vulnerabilities are ever exploited, you want your team to be focused on that 5%, or at least on the most important structures. runZero can help with that prioritization through asset detail and network context. Is this structure an empty warehouse, or is it a bank vault? Knowing what that structure is for helps with prioritization. Similarly, knowing that this asset is the CEO's laptop or it's a business critical server helps with prioritization. Another question, is this structure in a safe neighborhood or in a dicey neighborhood? Knowing the location of an asset helps with prioritization, right? So knowing if this asset is publicly facing, i.e. more accessible to the adversary, helps with prioritization. So asset details, knowing what it does, and network context, knowing where it is. Both of these help with prioritization of vulnerabilities. And how do you know about asset details and network context? Obviously from runZero. Finally, on to the third way that runZero can help with a vulnerability management program. Rhetorical question to the group. Do you think this person has impaired vision? Would you let this person drive you to the store without glasses? Would you let this person drive your children to the store without glasses? I think most of you would say, yes, this person has impaired vision. No, I would not let this person drive anybody anywhere. But the thing is, though, you're not an optometrist. You are not qualified to judge whether this person has visual impairment. You did not conduct an eye exam. And yet, you feel confident in saying that they have visual impairment. You have that confidence because there's a tell, right, that allows you to say, I'm pretty sure, I'm 99% sure that this person has visual impairment. And this tell allowed you to make a very, very quick decision. And it's a good thing too, because if you had to go wait for an eye exam, you'd be waiting a long time before you got that ride to the store. The same approach can be applied to 0 days as well, right? Those new vulnerabilities out in the wild, which may or may not yet have a patch, right? Through asset inventory, it is possible, I should say through runZero's asset inventory, it is possible to identify devices that are potentially vulnerable to a new remotely discoverable vulnerability. The great thing about this approach is that oftentimes you can just simply search the asset inventory to make a determination. You don't even have to rescan. So coming up with a list of assets that are potentially vulnerable takes, seconds or minutes, however long it takes you to run a query. This enables a more immediate response to these 0 days. Now, it is very important right now that I say very clearly to everybody listening that runZero is not a vulnerability scanner. We do not perform vulnerability checks. And we recommend that customers always follow up with a vuln scan, like, having a real eye exam. The problem is that customers are often having to wait for the vendor to release a new vuln check. And even if it does exist, the customer then has to rescan their network with that vuln check to find the vulnerable devices. With some of these new vulnerabilities, though, there isn't a whole lot of time to waste. You need to act immediately. And it is better to get started with your triage and remediation process with a list of potentially vulnerable assets where you have a very high confidence that they're vulnerable, instead of waiting around for a scan result just to be 100% certain. Very much like what you did with that person with the glasses. So these are the 3 ways to improve your vulnerability management program with runZero. And now you can do this with Tenable Security Center as well. Let's head over to the product so we can take a look at how this works. Okay. All right. And let's hope this didn't log me out. I hope not. All right. So this is what Tenable Security Center looks like. You may have heard in the past a product called Tenable.sc, right? Because they started doing those 2 letters after Tenable. Tenable. For their products, Tenable.io, Tenable.sc, Tenable.ot. So Tenable.sc was renamed to Tenable Security Center. And in fact, the product still says .sc, but officially it is called Tenable Security Center now. So if you hear that, just know that is equivalent to .sc. In any case, you can see I have about 120 hosts, 120 assets here in this particular instance. And I'm going to jump over and I'm going to use our new handy dandy integration start page here. and I'm going to select Tenable Security Center. I already created the credentials earlier. And because this is a demonstration, I don't want to import all 120,000 assets. So I'm going to import a much smaller set instead. So this is a query in Tenable Security Center. And as you can see, based on this, it looks like it's going to filter by addresses. And so this is going to import a subset of those 120,000 assets. The curious thing here is that is the ID for the query. And so I'm just going to drop that in over there, and I'm going to leave the rest of this default. These settings are very similar to the ones you find with the other Tenable integrations. All right, so we're going to let that run. All right, and okay, here's the inventory. As you can see here, these are all the devices that we imported in from Tenable Security Center. All right, questions?
Can you click into one of the assets?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There you go. See, we're good about it. Tenable Security Center, like they want it. Yep, and you can see all the vulnerabilities that were pulled in as well. We're pulling in assets as well as vulnerabilities. All right, I'm going to make an executive decision here on no more questions because I see we're coming up on time, and I want to make sure that we have a chance to get to the other ones. So apologies if anybody has additional questions. All right, the next one here is this one, the new onboarding. I'm happy to announce in 4.0, we have revamped our first-time user experience. This replaces the old onboarding wizard that we've lived with for 2 years. I'm not going to create a new user for this demo, so I wanted to show you a screenshot of the very first time somebody logs into runZero. This is the pop-up that will greet them going forward. But that's not all. Let's get into the product because I want to show you what this looks like in practice. So even existing users can see the onboarding guide as well. You come over here to the question mark, click on that. The biggest improvement over the previous onboarding is this guide following you. And this avoids the situation of new users falling out of the onboarding process and then getting lost without any way of getting back. I'm going to enable it here, and then you can see there's this jar that pulls out that follows along with you. So I'm going to click through other parts of the product. And as you can see, that onboarding guide is still there. So if I ever get lost, I can always just come back here and reorient myself and continue getting back on track with the step-by-step process that gets started. Each one of these has really helpful information to walk you through what you should do to get value out of runZero as quickly as possible. And another big change from the previous onboarding is that we now include all of our discovery approaches, right? Active scanning, passive traffic sampling, as well as API integrations. The user can get started with one of these, all of these, or some combination of these to build their asset inventory. And this also reinforces the idea that we're a best-in-class CAASM solution that has all of these approaches available to the user. And these are the remaining steps over here. We highlight reports. And if you are a power user of runZero, you just go to the question mark and you can disable the guide, and that's it. So CAASM, a fundamental problem that all CAASM solutions must solve is how to consolidate existing products, data from existing products, collect all that asset and exposure information into a single normalized view in a way that reconciles to conflicting data that might come from these various sources, right? So as an example here are some devices, right? In this yellowish part are devices that only Tenable knows about. Over here in the blue and yellow overlap, these are the devices that Tenable and Active Directory know about. Over here, these are the devices that Tenable, Active Directory, and CrowdStrike know about, right? So the question is, how does a CAASM solution know that this data from the vuln scanner and that data from the directory and this data from the EDR are referring to the same device? How does it know that? Well, that's actually a very hard problem to solve. And it's one all the CAASM solutions have to solve. runZero has the ability to munch through all that incoming data and accurately correlate with the right asset. And sometimes this means correlating by IP address. Sometimes it means correlating by MAC address. Sometimes it means correlating by something else entirely. And depending on the source, that field that runZero uses for correlation may be different. As you see in this example here, right? I have 4 different sources and we're correlating based on 4 completely different fields. Obviously, runZero does a good job of this, but for a user, it's not always clear why certain data was merged into an asset record as opposed to not. Because prior to 4.0, it wasn't obvious to the user which field was being used for matching. Well, that is going to change starting today. Let's jump over to the product over here. No, not that one. This one. Going to one particular asset. So here you see an asset that has multiple sources on it. And for the first time, you're going to see this section over here, the correlation section in each of these pills. Here you can see the task that was responsible for the first match, the field that it was matched on, and the value that caused the match. As you can see over here, Qualys matched on the IP address, while Rapid7 and Tenable matched on the MAC address. The important thing here is that now this information is accessible to users. And for those of you in customer engineering, I'm sure you're ecstatic because this helps you quickly debug merges. And I'm sure this quality of life improvement will be very, very well received by our customers as well. So that is the major improvement. It looks small, but it's a huge quality of life improvement for all of our users.